The American Revolution did not begin with muskets and cannon fire. It began with ideas, with grievances, with a slow-burning sense of injustice that grew over decades. By the mid-18th century, Britain was the most powerful empire on earth. Her red-coated soldiers guarded colonies across the globe, her navy ruled the seas, her merchants grew rich on trade. And in North America, 13 British colonies stretched from Maine to Georgia, home to more than 2 million settlers. At first, these colonists saw themselves as loyal subjects of the crown. They toasted the king, fought Britain's wars, and proudly called themselves Englishmen. But beneath the surface, tensions were growing. Tensions that would eventually erupt into open rebellion. This is the story of why the American colonies rose against their mother country. The causes of the American War of Independence. The spark for revolution was lit in a war fought years before. From 1756 to 1763, Britain and France clashed in the 7 Years' War. A global conflict fought in Europe, the Caribbean, Africa, India, and North America. In the colonies, it was known as the French and Indian War. British troops, aided by colonial militias, battled French forces and their Native American allies. When the war ended, Britain had won a stunning victory. France ceded Canada, lands east of the Mississippi, and vast territories. Britain now ruled the North American continent. But victory came at a cost. The war nearly bankrupted Britain. The national debt doubled. Maintaining troops to guard the vast new territories required money. And London believed the colonies, who had benefited most from the war, should help pay the bill. The colonists, however, saw things differently. They had fought and died alongside the British. They believed they had already paid in blood. Why should they be taxed to fund a distant empire's debts? Here, the first crack appeared between Britain and her colonies. In 1763, Britain faced another challenge. With France expelled, settlers rushed westward into Native American lands. But this sparked a violent uprising. Pontiac's Rebellion, a united native effort to drive the British from the frontier. To prevent further bloodshed, the Crown issued the Proclamation of 1763. It drew an invisible line along the Appalachian Mountains. Colonists were forbidden to settle west of it. For settlers hungry for land, this was an outrage. They had fought the French and shed blood for the frontier, only to be told they could not claim it. Land speculators, veterans, and farmers alike felt betrayed. To the colonists, the proclamation was not a safeguard, but a chain. It seemed Britain cared more for maintaining peace with native tribes than for rewarding her own subjects. The resentment deepened. But the true firestorm began with money. In 1765, Parliament passed the Stamp Act, the first direct tax on the American colonies. It required stamps on newspapers, legal documents, playing cards, even dice. The purpose was simple, to raise revenue from the colonies. But to the colonists, the issue was not the money. It was the principle. They had no representatives in Parliament. They had their own colonial assemblies. To be taxed by a body where they had no voice was tyranny. Outraged voices echoed across the colonies. No taxation without representation. Protests erupted. Merchants boycotted British goods. Lawyers refused to use stamped paper. A secret group, the Sons of Liberty, harassed tax collectors. In Boston, effigies of officials were hanged and burned. The uproar was so fierce that Parliament repealed the Stamp Act in 1766. But in doing so, it passed the Declaratory Act, asserting its right to tax and legislate for the colonies in all cases whatsoever. The colonists had won a battle, but Britain had drawn its line in the sand. In 1767, Chancellor of the Exchequer Charles Townshend introduced new duties on glass, paper, paint, lead, and tea imported into the colonies. The Townshend Acts reignited resistance. Colonists organized boycotts of British goods. Women spun homespun cloth, rejecting British textiles. Merchants signed non-importation agreements. Writers like John Dickinson, in his Letters from a Farmer in Pennsylvania, argued that Parliament's taxes violated colonial rights. Tension simmered. In Boston, British troops arrived in 1768 to enforce order. Soldiers and civilians eyed each other with growing hostility. The powder keg exploded in 1770. A mob confronted soldiers outside the customs house. Snowballs turned to rocks. Clubs were raised. Shots rang out. 5 colonists fell dead. The event became known as the Boston Massacre. Patriots seized on it as proof of British brutality. Paul Revere's engraving showed soldiers firing into an innocent crowd. The image spread like wildfire, fueling anger from New England to Virginia. Britain repealed most of the Townshend duties, but left a tax on tea, an emblem of its authority. The stage was set for another clash. Tea. It was the most popular drink in the colonies, and the most symbolic. In 1773, Parliament passed the Tea Act, granting the struggling East India Company the right to sell tea directly to the colonies, bypassing colonial merchants. Though it made tea cheaper, colonists saw it as a trick. An attempt to force them to accept Parliament's right to tax. In Boston, resistance took dramatic form. On the night of December 16, 1773, men disguised as Mohawk Indians boarded ships and dumped 342 chests of tea into the harbor. The Boston Tea Party shocked Britain. London's response was swift and harsh. The Coercive Acts, known in America as the Intolerable Acts, closed Boston's port, dissolved its assembly, and allowed royal officials to be tried in England. Instead of crushing dissent, the acts united the colonies in outrage. What had once been a Massachusetts problem became an American cause. In September 1774, delegates from 12 colonies gathered in Philadelphia. It was the first time Americans from across the continent had come together. The First Continental Congress declared the Intolerable Acts illegal, organized boycotts of British goods, and called on each colony to train militias. Though they still professed loyalty to the king, a new identity was forming. They no longer saw themselves merely as Virginians or New Englanders. They began to think of themselves as Americans. Beyond taxes and trade, deeper ideas fueled resistance. The colonists believed they were defending the ancient rights of Englishmen. Rights of self-government, trial by jury, and property. but they also absorbed new ideas from the Enlightenment, natural rights, liberty, and the social contract. Writers like John Locke argued that governments existed to protect the rights of life, liberty, and property. If a government violated those rights, the people had the right to resist, even overthrow it. Pamphlets, sermons, and newspapers spread these ideas through taverns and town meetings. Liberty became not just a political argument, but a moral cause. The cry for freedom was in the air. By early 1775, the rift between Britain and America seemed beyond repair. The king dismissed colonial petitions. Parliament declared Massachusetts in rebellion. British troops in Boston prepared for conflict. In the countryside, militias drilled with muskets and powder, ready to defend their rights. The colonists were not yet calling for independence, but they were prepared to fight for their liberties. On April 19, 1775, the first shots were fired at Lexington and Concord. The war had begun. The causes of the American War of Independence were not simple. They were a web of grievances. Economic, political, and ideological. The debt of the 7 Years' War, the Proclamation of 1763, the Stamp Act, the Townshend Duties, the Boston Massacre, the Tea Act, the Intolerable Acts. All were milestones on the road to rebellion. But deeper still were the ideas of liberty, representation, and self-government. The colonists did not see themselves as revolutionaries. At first, they sought only the rights of Englishmen. But when those rights were denied, they chose independence. What began as a protest over taxes became a revolution that reshaped the world. The American Revolution was born not in the roar of muskets, but in the hearts and minds of people who believed that freedom was worth fighting for.